Before we start, can I just be a bit random and ask, how are things in LA?
Yeah.
LA is trying to get back to normal. So we're still having problems, but we have a very high vaccination rate. You see all the little kids with their masks, and you imagine, what if you were like 7 or 8 years old, and
That's true.
the last 2 years, all you've ever known is that you have to be afraid and wear a mask.
But we do the best that we can, and one thing we know is always going to be true, isn't it? And that's change.
That's that. You have that British point of view. I like that.
I have that German point of view.
it's
one step after another. That's the German.
It's a South London point of view.
One, two, three, four.
There we go.
There we go. Oh my God.
Hello, Craig.
Hello, Craig. Can you hear us? No.
You're on mute, my darling.
You're on mute. We can't hear you. We can't hear you.
How's that?
Oh, that's great.
Perfect. That's usually what I do, Craig. I talk away and don't realize.
No, I've done this 1,000. I teach a course at a university here, and we were all on Zoom last year. So you'd think I'd know by now how many. I've been on Zoom way too many times, right?
Okay. I think we all have, haven't we? We really have.
Right. Ladies and gentlemen, it's German late night again, and I'm here with my beautiful co-host, Sydney Thompson. Hi, Sydney. How are you?
Hello, everyone.
Hi.
Great to be with you tonight.
Yeah. We are joined, in my opinion, by one of the greatest composers of the 80s, of all time, maybe. He has scored classics like The Last Starfighter. I have it here, The Last Starfighter. The Last Starfighter. Remo Williams, The Adventure Begins. A part of the Nightmare on Elm Street series, of course. Part 4, I guess. Thief, Stand and Deliver, and many, many more. And the iconic sitcom Cheers. Please welcome Mr. Craig Safan.
Amazing to have you.
Welcome to the show. Great to have you. Really nice.
Before we start, can I just be a bit random and ask, how are things in LA?
Yeah.
LA is trying to get back to normal. So we're still having problems, but we have a very high vaccination rate.
Right.
And now we've just gone into where you have to show your vaccination card or app, whatever people are using, every time you go into a restaurant. But of course, all the restaurants almost all now have outside seating as well. And luckily, although it is raining today, usually the weather is pretty good for outside eating. So we're all hanging in there. We're all worried about the next stage. And I think the worst is for young people who are just starting their career. It's probably been very difficult. And of course, for a lot of younger parents, my daughter teaches singing, and a lot of her students are, middle school, high school, and those parents must be going insane. You see all the little kids with their masks, and you imagine, what if you were like 7 or 8 years old, and
that's true.
The last 2 years, all you've ever known is that you have to be afraid and wear a mask.
I literally have an 11 and a 7-year-old, and I'm getting the feeling my son doesn't remember a time before Corona. So, it's definitely very different to the time that I grew up in the 70s. Very, very different indeed.
Sure.
But we do the best that we can, and one thing we know is always going to be true, isn't it? And that's change.
That's that. You have that British point of view. I like that.
It's actually,
And I have that German point of view.
it's
one step after another. That's the German.
It's a South London point of view. It's like, it's always raining. Let's do the best we can and put our umbrellas up.
Yeah, very good.
I got it. I lived in Essex for a year, so I know.
Okay. Wow. Okay. When was that, and what was that experience like?
70 to 71. I was on a fellowship. I was on a fellowship after I graduated university, and it was sort of very free. And I wanted to write music, but I wanted to be near London because of the electronic music scene in London in the 70s. But I didn't want to live in London because I grew up in Los Angeles, which is a big city. And so I found a place in what was called the Greenbelt of London.
Yes, know it well, yes.
Yeah, and so I found a place out almost to Epping Forest, not quite.
Oh, amazing.
Where on a horse farm, where the man who owned it, who was quite elderly, was renting out his caretaker's lodge. So I had this little cottage in the middle of just endless acres of farm and horses and, of course, cattle, and it was a wonderful year. But the sun barely came out.
You're making Essex sound romantic.
Well, believe it or not, it was at that time.
Yeah, long time ago.
Long ago.
And so that was that was 70 to 71, and I'm. If I'm right, your sort of career in composing started in around 75?
Yes.
How did that happen? How did that come about?
Yeah. Well, I think looking back, I was incredibly lucky because I started getting films when I think I was about 25 or something like that. 20, So I came back from Essex and started playing. The whole year in Essex, I just wrote music every day. I bought an old piano and put it in this cottage. And so I really had practiced and written songs, though. I was a songwriter. I never went to music school. I was a fine arts major. But I played piano since I was 5 years old, and I improvised, and my mother got me a teacher who taught me how to improvise. So that was great. I was a songwriter when I came back and playing with my brother in Los Angeles, trying to make a living, working part-time at my father's store because I couldn't make a living, just struggling, basically doing that. But, and I lived sort of in the outskirts of Los Angeles because I made a lot of noise. So I couldn't be in an apartment, because in those days, there were not a lot of electronic music instruments. So if you were banging at the piano all night like I was and had neighbors, you
not the most beloved neighbor in the neighborhood.
No. So I just actually fell into film music. I got a call from an old classmate who had gotten married and moved to Los Angeles, and her husband had made a low-budget horror film. And she said, my husband and I are out here. He's starting AFI, American Film Institute. And he made this film. And you're the only person I know in Los Angeles who knows music. Do you know who can write the music for this horror film? And I said, I'll do it.
Synchronicity.
And I did it.
Okay.
And I immediately went, I love doing this. I was trying to write hit pop tunes, which is like shooting a gun into a little teeny hole. It's so specific, and my talents are really, my songs sounded like operas or symphonies, and so my talent is much more eclectic and much broader.
The perfect match.
What's that?
The perfect match.
Yeah. So when I did this one film, which never got released, and the director turned out to be, he took a long time for his career to start. It was John McTiernan, it turned out.
Really?
You may know who that is. Yeah.
Yeah, of course.
And and then they got divorced and all that. But anyway.
He was the director of this movie, of this horror movie.
Yes, and it was never released. And then he went on to do, Die Hard and Predator. And
Die Hard, of course. Unbelievable.
great connection to have.
Yeah, well, he sort of started me in my career, but I loved it, and somehow my career just within a year took off. I just went, I have to be doing this. Mm-hmm. Then I got a call about doing music for an old friend of my brother's who had done a documentary, and then that led to a low budget film, sort of a Roger Corman kind of film, you know, girls with guns and not much clothes on, and you know, that one of those. And but then that director, Michael Pressman, suddenly went from doing this low budget film, and I did the music with like a 10-piece band that I played the piano on, and suddenly he was hired to do the reboot of the Bad News Bears series.
Ooh, okay.
I don't know if you know that movie, but it's about
of course, Walter
playing
Matthau.
baseball. Yeah. And he got hired because Paramount was looking for some new talent, and they were not doing very well. And somehow I got the job and and they said, I got the job and they said, great, Craig, we're the first Bad News Bears. They adapted the music from Carmen. So on this one, you're adapting the music from the 1812 Overture by Tchaikovsky.
Wow.
So I said, great. And I never heard the 1812 Overture. So I went out and I bought, the score. And I went, oh, I can do this. I can figure this out. It's not that.
It's where the playing by tune comes in handy, playing by ear, right?
Yeah, and and in the meantime, I had done lots of in college. I did a lot of original musicals, and I learned how to bring in players, and I could always read music very well. So I was even arranging a few pop albums when I was still in college. So I could, I could read music very well, and I knew I had already become interested in classical music really through The Rite of Spring, which was the first classical piece I ever bought on a LP, and then bought the score. So I started, instead of starting with Mozart, I started with Stravinsky and worked backwards. So I have sort of a weird background.
That's the first time I've heard that one.
So there are a lot of movies you did in the 70s, of course in the 80s, and also in the 90s. What I didn't know before the interview, that you composed the music for the TV sitcom Cheers, yeah?
Oh, yeah.
And that was quite for a long time. It was about 11 years, the show?
Yes. It was 11 years.
270 episodes, I've read, yeah? And how do you manage to compose for so many episodes? How does that work?
Well, Cheers was a huge, huge hit. The first year, it was at the bottom of the ratings, and we thought it was going to be canceled. But then the head of NBC decided to give it another shot. He really liked it. Mm-hmm. And then suddenly it took off, and it was the #1 show for year after year after year. It became an iconic show here in the States.
It was sacred in our household in London.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, London, anywhere where there's a drinking culture. So I would guess Germany. I don't know if it translated to Germany, but
absolutely, it translated to Germany, of course.
Because I can see by the royalties which countries liked it.
Yeah. They're also a very drinking culture here in Germany. Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah.
No, I have several German friends here, and we always go out, and we go out for lunch. And this is the guy, Robin Esterhammer, who was head of Perseverance Records out here. Mm-hmm. And he's German. And we go out to lunch every 6 months because we were good friends. And I would have like a sandwich and a Coke, and he would be on his third beer. And I go, how can you
for breakfast,
I said, how can you do that? I'd be asleep. And he goes, Craig, you don't understand. I started doing this when I was a little boy. This was part of my culture. It doesn't affect me that way. But I was like, it was I couldn't believe it. How do you go back to work after,
It's a German genetic thing.
I don't know. But have you ever been to Germany, by the way?
Very briefly. when I was a little boy with my parents. We were in Baden-Baden.
Okay.
Is that how you say it? And,
yeah, Baden-Baden.
And I believe Munich for a day. It was just a very quick trip with my parents.
Okay.
My brother's an artist, and he's had a gallery in Hamburg for a long time.
Oh,
Okay.
amazing.
And I'm interested in going back to Munich because I did a musical once about Lola Montez, who was an English dancer personality who hooked up with Ludwig II. I think that not Crazy King Ludwig, but the Ludwig before that, and who built Valhalla.
Okay.
And so I've always wanted to see the architecture.
Okay. Yeah, great. Yeah, absolutely.
Definitely some amazing castles there as well. Yeah.
Yeah, and yeah.
Sorry, Sid. Just short goes back to Cheers. If you score, like, did you like score every episode, or how do you do that?
No, so I'm sorry I leaned out of the subject.
No problem.
But
I'm just interested.
Cheers, and many 3-camera sitcoms, half-hour sitcoms, like Friends and that are filmed live. The people who run those shows are writers, and they don't generally like a lot of music. They basically want the music to get you into the scene, out of the scene, do a transition for time, get you into a commercial. The first episode of Cheers, I scored, and they said, very nice, but Craig, we don't want music over dialogue. They're writers. And if you look at, Will and Grace, I don't know which shows you're familiar with, but you're basically, each show maybe has 5 minutes of music.
Yeah.
And also at the beginning of every season, I would just write, like 40 random cues, and we would go in and create a library. And then they would call me in. So maybe a third to half of the shows I would write specifically. But I could write 3 shows in an afternoon and then go in the next day in the studio and record them.
Okay,
so to me, even though Cheers has become very famous, to me it was sort of a weekend gig. It wasn't, my big job was, how do I write, an hour of music for a symphony? Cheers, oh yeah, I'll write that like that and show up tomorrow. And I played all the piano on that show. So it really wasn't, I never gave it much thought other than I liked the show. It's a very funny show.
Yeah, absolutely.
So does that mean that the work that really gets you passionate is completely different to stuff that you'd literally just bang out really quickly and then, have that there and ready for the library?
No, I don't think that's true. I was very passionate about the music to Cheers, in that I came up with the concept of what the show sounded like. It sounded like a band in a bar late at night. There was never electronics. There's never electric guitar or any synthesizers. It was sort of funky, very laid back. And then the clarinet guy couldn't play very well, so he was always stretching to reach the notes and bending to the next one. So it had a whole concept.
Really like a bar.
Huh?
Really like a bar.
Really like a bar. That's what it was supposed to sound like sort of okay musicians who probably had another job during the day. But that was the concept from the first show that I came up with. So it wasn't that I wasn't passionate about it. It was that it doesn't take very long to write a 4-second, or a 10-second piece of music where I'm just going ba da 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 ba.
That music really made the feel of the show as well. It was amazing.
It totally captured the show. So.
Totally. So you probably noticed that Chris is really the film expert, and I'm just really honored to be in the room with you two, So I'm going to ask questions you probably might find really stupid in advance.
I doubt it.
But I'm just fascinated about how things are for you. So is there like a community of composers in LA that you're sort of connected with, or do you have a favorite composer that's sort of inspired or influenced your work?
Well, I'm really on the other side of my career. I don't work that much at this point. I've been writing my own albums for the last 6 years. I have 3 albums out. But the odd thing about this job is that while I've met many composers, we're sort of lone wolves. You know, we're in competition and we work on a film, and sometimes someone else comes in and replaces your music with their music, and sometimes you do that to them. Chris might know there's a whole book that's that thick that just catalogs all the scores that have been replaced and thrown out. Are you aware of that?
Oh my gosh!
Yeah, I've heard of that.
And so the business. I know many composers. In terms of friends, I think one of my closest friends is Peter Bernstein.
Oh,
Peter is Elmer's son, and has done quite a few works on his own, and also orchestrated. He orchestrated my score to Wolfen, and he also just orchestrated the new Ghostbusters Afterlife movie.
Oh, really?
Just was released, a week or two ago here. But Peter and I because we knew each other before I was a film composer. So the story, I'll give you a little story, is that because you asked how I started, I was writing songs with my brother and singing, and I was part of a group of musicians at a recording studio with a producer. And one of those musicians was Peter, who was a bass player and played in a band, and he played on my demos. And then and so when I got my first film job, I thought, oh, Peter, your dad's a composer, right? Elmer Bernstein, right? Yeah, sure. Do you think he'd mind if I called him? Oh, no. And then I looked at the guitar player who I'd been working with, Andrew Gold, who was a brilliant guitar player. I said, your dad's Ernest Gold. He's a composer, right? Yeah, Ernest Gold wrote the theme to Exodus and all of Stanley Kramer's movies.
wow.
He was an Austrian emigre during that period. And so Ernest started teaching me composition. And then I looked at my friend Wendy Waldman, and her friend was Fred Steiner, who wrote a lot of the Twilight Zone episodes, the Perry Mason theme, who was an amazing musicologist. And so I had these 3 amazing mentors when I was in my early 20s.
That's incredible. Literally network to greatness.
Serendipitous.
So just like Sid mentioned, I'm the big movie soundtrack admirer. Yeah, I'm the fan. So the first time I came across your work maybe in the 90s, was when I discovered the scores you did for The Last Starfighter and of course Remo Williams, which are very, very great, I think. Yeah. And from today's point of view, how do you look at movies like Remo Williams or Last Starfighter? I mean, for us or for me, they are like cult movies, or also kind of big Hollywood projects. How do you look at them today?
Well, they were both pretty big movies, and I like, especially The Last Starfighter. I don't think did as well in the box office. However, it right after that period was sort of the video revolution where everybody had home video and everybody found that movie on video. So you can't believe how many people grew up knowing that movie.
Yeah, absolutely.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So a lot of people know that movie. And I, looking back at it, I just was revisiting it because it's going to be published. So I had to get the old scores out. We had to scan them. It's going to be published as a music book.
Okay.
Like a score.
Great.
A whole book. They're starting to do that with some of the scores now. It's a big project to do something like that. It takes about a year because it was all written in pencil. So it all has to be inputted into the computer and then published and the rights and all that. So I love Last Starfighter. I'm totally proud of it. It doesn't sound dated to me. Even the synthesizers are pretty subtle, and they were recorded live with the orchestra. Whereas after that period, we tended to do the, like Remo Williams, there were way more synthesizers on that. And we had 24 tracks of synths, and that was recorded first, then the orchestra, then the Korean orchestra. And so I still like Remo Williams quite a bit. It's the most complex score I ever did. So it's a real challenge. But I think The Last Starfighter is certainly one of my favorite scores, and I think it holds up pretty well.
Absolutely.
I don't think complexity is always the best. And I think for me, I've struggled to be simpler, because I think especially early in my career before Starfighter, I can remember my wife coming in and saying, Craig, less notes, like in the movie Amadeus, what someone said to Mozart, less notes, too many notes.
Contain genius,
Simplicity is hard to reach. And I really think that for me, everything I do is somewhat complex because that's the way I like it, but I'm always trying to edit and be simpler in a way.
It's fascinating.
Yeah, I mean, is there a difference if you to work for a major studio as a composer?
Yes, it can. I mean, the good thing is that you have a lot of resources, because usually you have a lot of money to do what you want to do.
Yeah.
I think the bad thing is that I did this movie, Mr. Wrong, that was a big orchestra with Ellen DeGeneres. It just was a disaster. And the studio was just always behind everybody's back, getting music from the recording sessions without telling people, and making, they were sort of micromanaging quite a bit. So that can happen with the studio. On the other hand, independent movies could be just as bad, because in a way, independent movies a lot of times are made by people who haven't done it that much. And so they really are sort of not sure how to talk to the composer or what to do or what to expect. So, every job is hard. Every job has its challenges. It's rare that it doesn't. The Last Starfighter was one of those that was, I mean, not that we didn't do rewrites and do this and that, but it was just charmed. It felt so good, and I get along so well with that director and the producer in the studio, which was called Lorimar, pretty much left us alone. And I had a huge orchestra. My model was sort of a Mahler size orchestra, which is huge, and sort of Sibelius a little bit, and I was able to get all those resources, which was
and I mean, you have such a special way to score movies. The mix between synthesizer and orchestra. I think that's quite unique. Really.
It's a very distinctive sound, isn't it?
What's that?
It's a very distinctive sound. Your sound.
I guess. I can't tell.
For us, the immortals.
Yeah, for us it is. So let me ask you, Craig, what do you think about modern film music? In your opinion, how did it evolve? What changes have you seen in the industry as a composer?
Yeah, the business has changed in a major way, in that during the Last Starfighter period, which was sort of the mid 80s, people didn't really mock up scores. So I can remember sitting at a piano and playing the themes to the producer and director, and they had to imagine that was being played by a huge symphony orchestra. And, they sort of went along with it, but I know they didn't really hear it, because who does? Few people could. So, but now everything is temp tracked completely with synthesizers. Every cue is mocked up. And then also the film, because of the digital, everything is digital, the film never really gets locked in the same way. The film is always floating. It's always being changed. So the music always has to be conformed to the picture. So that's changing a lot too. And that's just on a technical level. So a lot of times, by the time the composer comes in, they already have a full score of existing music that has been cut into the film perfectly, because with Pro Tools you can do that. And a lot of times, because they've listened to that score, meaning the editor and the director, and maybe the studio, they've listened to it 500 times, they can't think of it any other way. And the composer sort of has to go in and sound like that, but not get sued by the original owner of the copyright. And, so that's a problem. Temp track, that's called a temp track. And that's changed quite a bit.
It's a hugely different creative process.
Yeah, it's much more a creative process now because of the mock-ups, where a lot of, especially composers who are busy, have almost a whole little workshop. They have a lot of like other younger composers working on all these mock-ups, changing, I guess it's sort of more of a Renaissance kind of thing where, okay, you paint the angels, you paint the clouds, you do the castle in the background, I'll do the
I'll write the signature at the bottom.
I'll write the signature and do Mary in the middle, right? So it's really different. I think the other different thing that is a lot of people complain about, especially a lot of people who love film music, is the lack of melody and the lack of theme in most movies for the last 20 years. So unless you're doing a Disney animation or John Williams, hum the theme to Dunkirk, hum the theme to pretty much any movie. Even the superhero movies, the themes are so short, they're on them for and then they're gone. The music is more part of the sound picture. So now a lot of times it's hard to tell, are those basses and cellos, or is that the machine room, where they are? You can't tell if it's a sound effect, and they're mixed that way. They're all mixed. Also, when they get the music now, every instrument's on a separate track, every sound. So on the dub stage, they can say, "Oh, I like that beating. Push that up. Let's pull the rest back." And now they bring up the sound of the actual sound of the film. So, the days of thematic film music are not. I think it'll come back at some point, but right
hopefully.
now, well, anyone who's really a film aficionado wants the melody,
absolutely,
they want the themes, and so that's why they go back to the 80s, because that was when
that's true.
Every movie had a theme,
right,
whoever the composer was, but that is not the fashion today. The fashion today is to write without a theme.
That's sad.
Why
That's
do you
really
think
sad.
that's come about? Is it just efficiency, or what how does that happen?
No, it's not efficiency. I think it's a few things. I think it's that the directors started getting tired of always having to deal with themes. I think the whole idea of sound design became more and more important starting in the 90s. I think the control that with multi-track tape and then the development of digital, like Pro Tools, gave people the opportunity, plus the speakers got better, the Dolby got better. You could start sculpting your whole sound picture, and the idea of a big theme for most directors just became unimportant. Yeah.
When you let me ask you, when you watch movies yourself, do you listen to the movie soundtrack? Are you like,
Yeah.
okay, no,
I do. Yeah.
yeah, they could have done it better or that or
No, it's more like, oh, no, because I don't have a judgment about it. I was just
okay,
describing what is. Uh, I understand if I was a filmmaker, I might do that too. And then a lot of filmmakers also will go, well, that cue doesn't work. Let's buy something, or let's hire someone else to do this one cue. And they're always switching and pulling and this and that. But I think one of the places that started, even though it has a great score, is the first Alien.
yeah,
Jerry
Goldsmith. Yeah.
Okay. Each compartment in the spaceship had a different sound. It was very specific. So one room had a little like sort of dripping. Another room had a sound of chains always going. Another room maybe had a low thump. And that became, and it was scary, those sounds.
That built the atmosphere.
Absolutely. Yeah, it was scary.
So the atmosphere was that what could have been done musically was done with the actual sound design of the picture. And the Goldsmith score would come in, but it would sort of come in, it was very subdued mostly. And at the end, I guess they actually replaced the score with a very melodic score, Howard Hanson's Second Symphony, which has been used to replace a lot of scores. But and that was the only real melodic element where was the end title, the resolution of the film.
Sorry, Sid, just one question. What do you think about composers like Alan Silvestri or John Williams, who do just like big orchestral scores? What do you think about them?
Well, I love them. They're, like Alan is basically my age, and he does do very melodic scores.
Yeah, absolutely.
He doesn't do that many scores now, but they're very melodic, like Back to the Future and things like that. And John Williams is like, the master. That's all he does is do these big, huge melodies, and they're amazing. Okay. But Alan uses a lot of synthesizers, especially on his early scores.
Yeah, his early scores.
Romancing the Stone had tons of synthesizers.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, I mean, he is, besides you, my favorite composer. It's Craig Safan and Alan Silvestri.
Well, Alan's great. He is. I love some of his scores.
Well, I'm sorry, it's only Craig Safan for me now.
That's what you're
the world now.
That's the appropriate response at this moment.
That's a South Londoner response.
Yeah.
But seriously,
I know what to say right now. Yeah.
Okay. No, but seriously, I'm jealous of your students being able to just sit and listen to your perspective on how things have developed, and it's so interesting.
Well, I'll tell you what my class is, because nobody else is doing this class. When I thought a few years ago that I wanted to teach, I'd never taught before. And I thought, but I don't want to teach young composers. There's already a lot of people doing that. What I think should be taught is all these young people in film schools. And there's like so many film schools of young directors, young editors, young writers. They don't know anything about music and how music works. And they have no perspective. And yet they'll walk in and they'll be just laying all this music on their films, cutting to it, with no idea how do you work with a composer? What does a music editor do? What's the history of film music? And so I've developed this course that, I talk about how music affects the brain, how music goes into your body, even though you didn't tell it to go into your body, it does anyway. And it changes your pulse. It changes the conductivity of your skin. When you're in a group of people, and there's like EDM was the biggest example, everybody's brain waves start to sync up together, and that boom, 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 the big EDM things. Well, all that is in music too. So I talk a lot about the development of music and why why people think music is so important, because it's extremely important to all cultures, and yet it isn't eating, it isn't reproduction. You'd think you could live without music, but it's right there.
And it's always been there, hasn't it? From the most ancient of cultures. So you know it plays in
absolutely. You can find instruments back 14,000, 20,000 years for sure.
Oh my gosh! I want to get on a plane now and come and visit one of your classes, because it's a wonderful take. Instead of teaching composers how to work with film, you're teaching the film workers how to work with music and with composers.
Yeah. Nobody else is doing that.
Yeah. So from your point of view, is it more difficult today getting into movie business as a composer than it was in the 70s?
Something that's a very hard question to answer, because it looks like it's harder. It looks like there's a huge amount of competition. Unless you're a top composer, the fees are much lower, because they go, well, you don't need that much money. I mean, you can do this on your laptop. You can do this score at home. Why, here's $10,000 for the whole thing instead of $500,000 for an orchestra. So is it more difficult to get in the business? It's very hard for me to tell, because there are people that still get into business.
Yeah.
And when you're in your 20s or 30s, you have this huge amount of energy and desire and terror, and I was in it 1,000% when I was that age, because I had to make money. I had a family. I wanted to succeed very badly. So I think when people are that age, they have this very strong desire to make it. But even in my day, there were very few composers who actually could make a living at it. It's how many? 100 composers at that point who could actually say they're making a living. So I don't think it's changed that much, because still what's the percentage of success? It's not very big.
Do you have a desire for scoring another big budget movie? Do you have something like that?
It would be nice, but I don't think about it too much. I think I don't think it's going to happen. And I think at this point I should be happy doing my music, and I have financial security at this point, and in a way I don't know that I want to deal with the studios and if it was just writing music, I'd probably say yes, but it's rarely that. It's dealing with a lot of issues,
Yeah. Okay, I see. Yeah. Well, I think we reached the end of our show. It was a great interview. It was very tight, very much information. Yeah, it was really, really interesting to listen to you.
And if I can, get to the point in my career where you are now and look back and have had such iconic impact on a whole industry in the way you have, I would, if I don't even had 10% of that, I would be very, very proud. So it's been an absolute pleasure just to hear and get a little peek inside your genius mind. Thank you so much.
My pleasure. Nice talking to both of you too.
Wonderful talking to you.
So thank you very much, Craig. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you for having me.
Yeah.
It's been an absolute honor. Thank you so much for taking the time out.
Yeah, and we wish you, of course, happy holidays, Merry Christmas. Yeah.
Same to you.
Thank you.
Okay.
And
have a great day.
Yeah, have a great day. See you. Yeah. Bye-bye. Great.
Bye-bye.